Progressivism is a societal cancer. Oh, hi there. Welcome to the Freedom Alternative. In many instances, I tend to get confused with people with other political stances because, I tend to be socially conservative on many issues. However, just because I think something is morally wrong, that does not, sine qua non, imply that I believe it should be illegal. For instance, a few videos ago, I spent quite some time explaining why I think adultery is utterly immoral. However, I only advocated social responses to it, such as public shaming, shunning, losing one's job, etc. And I think these sorts of reactions are more than enough, and imprisoning people for adultery really is too much. The same stance I apply to prostitution. I think prostitution is immoral, and I most definitely would not recommend my nieces or anyone else to pursue a career in whoredom, or as the PC term goes today, sex work. In fact, I may even consider removing my nieces from any inheritance from me if they would be professional whores. However, I don't think the law should try to stop them or their employers or anyone else from providing a voluntary service that someone else wants and is willing to respect the terms of the voluntary agreement that emerges at the intersection of supply and demand. Last week, the media reported the arrest of 7 people over the multi-million-dollar internet brothel rentboy.com. Although the site itself explicitly forbid prostitution and described itself as, quote, the world's largest male escort site, the US federals insist that the place is an internet brothel and arrested the CEO and 6 employees under the charge of promoting illegal prostitution, and those arrested face up to 5 years in jail and big fines. Now, you know what? I also happen to think that the place is an internet brothel. I mean, come on, let's face it. Even the advocates for prostitution include escorts into the so-called sex work industry, and it's an open secret that escorts exist as a way to avoid the laws regarding prostitution. It's a kind of don't ask, don't tell. And the same goes for many other businesses such as massage salons and so on. Anyway. The problem, though, is that the CEO of this website and his 6 employees have not really harmed anyone. The website was charging men for the privilege of posting their advertisement on their platform and guaranteed different levels of exposure on their platform depending on the fees the clients were willing to pay. Let's put it this way. Supposedly, I make a website where people who have local area networks at home pay me, let's say, $2 or any amount to post ads on my website, and that they're willing to take people in to play LAN games. Other people, let's say, pay 10 cents or 50 cents to find like-minded people more easily. As a result of this, users amongst themselves reach agreements to meet and play LAN games, and the owner of the LAN may or may not charge the visitors. This move would be entirely legal practically everywhere, although in Sweden it would be taxed. But anyway, yet instead of LAN owners and LAN enthusiasts, my website connects, let's say, penis owners, like in the case of rentboy.com, with penis enthusiasts. That's suddenly wrong. But why? I mean, just because I don't approve of it, that's not a sufficient reason to imprison people. If the law would be made based on what I approve of, or what you, the audience, approve or disapprove, the whole place would be quite messed up. And this is why an increasing number of people are adopting the worldview that only things that actually harm third parties should be dealt with by the law. Yet when it comes to prostitution, the case for third-party harm is actually very weak. How are you indeed harmed by the fact that Andrew and Anna are having sex in their apartment and one of them gets some cash for that? Well, the answer is that you're not. The prostitution topic is also a topic that makes me smile from time to time because it tends to unite in its opposition one of the most bizarre elements of the society, such as fascists, militant theocrats, anti-fascist feminists, and some other categories for which normal people tend to hold utter disdain, and for bloody good reason. For some reason, the common person tends to be in favor of legalizing prostitution. Have you ever wondered why? Well, what if I told you that the advocacy for making prostitution illegal has never been a popular position, and it's quite a new phenomenon by historical standards. You see, it's not an accident that the most hardline militants for keeping prostitution illegal tend to come from the left wing. Now, although there are quite a few authoritarian right-wingers who do advocate keeping prostitution illegal, the stance itself is not part of the traditional right-wing thought. Not even by a long shot, actually. Many think that, this dispute is between the so-called traditionalists and the so-called non-traditionalists who want prostitution illegal, yet the actual traditionalist position is to tolerate prostitution as a lesser evil. Now, I know that sounds shocking to some of you, but let's look at history for a little bit. There's records that as early as the 12th century, the church accepted prostitution as a fact of life, and although it thought of it as immoral, it still tolerated it because of various reasons, such as the fact that the whores could still repent and have their souls led to salvation, and also they accepted it for more realistic purposes. For instance, the church saw prostitution as the lesser evil when compared to rape, sodomy, and masturbation. Now, the church was wrong many times in its very long history, but it is indeed true that the availability of prostitution, alongside with the availability of porn, does indeed reduce the incidence of rape. Now, mind you, the 12th century position of the church wasn't such a novelty. Ancient Greece or ancient Rome also had legal prostitution, and there was also little shame about both male and female prostitutes, although the Romans were a bit ambivalent about it. Even as early as the 4th century, after Rome officially adopted Christianity, the church still did not attempt to ban prostitution, and the brothels in Pompeii were high-revenue tourist attractions, and by some accounts they were actually state-operated. Moving forward in history, the attitudes towards prostitution varied, but the legal climate remained largely similar. For instance, advocates against prostitution tried to use the syphilis outbreak in Naples in 1494 as a reason to ban prostitution. Did it work? Well, not really. There were limited territories in Europe where the secular authorities succeeded in temporarily removing prostitution from their societies, but the ban did not last, as neither the church nor the state could really deal with this phenomenon. Also, the abolitionist phenomenon was slowly gaining traction, and that meant that prostitution was becoming even more profitable as slavery was on its way to being abolished. The Protestant Revolution also came with some bans on brothels, but these were also overturned quite fast for pretty much the same reasons. Everyone was better off and safer if prostitution was legal and regulated. Also, this chain of events isn't exclusive as to Europe. Japan and India, for instance, had similar struggles. The only ones who did not have such struggles were the Ottomans, who, surprise, surprise, just like the Christians, tolerated prostitution as a lesser evil. In fact, Ottoman archives show even sketches of prostitutes, both male and female, and lists their prices, how many times they could bring their customers to orgasm, and the details of their sexual practices. The first real curbing of the prostitution phenomenon started in, the 20th century. And it started with Karl Marx's ideas, and also continued with Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. And the United States, it started with the social purity movement. The social purity movement was essentially a movement comprised by feminist women and fascist Christian women. The social purity movement is actually guilty of a lot of insane laws and procedures that some of them still exist today in the United States. The social purity movement advocated absurd age of consent laws, the prohibition of alcohol, absurd prostitution laws, the inception of the legal war on drugs, the anti-pornography laws, the decency laws, eugenics, and a lot more of other illiberal or anti-liberty ways of thinking. Prostitution, for instance, was first made illegal in Russia in 1922. That is exactly the year the Soviet Union was officially founded. In fact, the first countries to adopt hardcore legislation against prostitution both in Europe and Asia were the communist countries. Britain only outlawed prostitution in 1956 because of concerns over white British adolescent girls being used as prostitutes by Pakistani immigrants. Sound familiar? Oh, that's right, that eventually did happen, even though the prostitution is still illegal. You know, the prostitution debate and the prostitution being illegal reminds me of gun control. The law tends to target in the wrong direction, namely at law-abiding citizens. But anyway, let's not digress too much. The funniest thing is that in the 70s, the same leftists that wanted prostitution illegal in the first half of the 20th century now advocated in favor of its legalization. The funniest situation is in the Netherlands, where the political party that got prostitution legalized in the country is now the same party that advocates a ban on it. You see, the perpetual revolution till the point they eat their own is not exactly a new phenomenon on the left. It has been part of the left since, well, since forever. In present days, the left is where it used to be in the 1910 to 1930s. Anti-prostitution, anti-alcohol, anti-porn, and generally anti-anything fun for anyone else. They have indeed whitewashed some of their positions, or at least the package of it. For instance, they now advocate racial and sexual segregation by saying that they create safe spaces, although the safe spaces argument was used to forward sexual segregation by Marxist feminists even in the 1910s. In present days, the most vigorous opposition to prostitution legalization tends to come from the far left. Less than a month ago, Amnesty International finally came out in support of prostitution legalization. Yet this move antagonized the leftist friends of Amnesty International, who, unsurprisingly for people like me, tend to take the same old Marxist position. And when I say Marxist, I mean that literally, since it was Marx himself who claimed that prostitution is just another facet of worker exploitation that needs to be abolished. In an article for The Marxian, Jessica Neuwirth, a so-called international human rights lawyer, now I don't know what that is either, but it's safe to say that if all the international human rights lawyers would disappear tomorrow, we wouldn't notice. So anyway, this feminist ideologue argued in the newspaper before the vote in Amnesty International that prostitution legalization is a conspiracy of the global sex trade industry, because one can't possibly come to such a position through any other means than just by being bought by the evil patriarchy, right? But since modern feminists have to at least pretend that they don't have the holier-than-thou authoritarian attitude, they can't craft the argument the way the social purity movement did 100 years ago. Luckily for them, they have progressive feminist Sweden to point out to. You see, in Sweden, prostitution is not illegal, but buying prostitution is. The Swedish model works pretty much like this. Look, we do respect the choice of those who choose to work in the prostitution industry, but we will cut off the contact between them and the rest of the market because we really respect their choice. We just think their choice is wrong, but because we can't say that, we'll just bury the whole thing into progressive doublethink and say we're fighting oppression, or potato, or something like that. Where I'm getting with this is that prostitution legalization has always been the standard position of most people, including the people who utterly dislike prostitution on moral grounds, and it's only totalitarians, and particularly totalitarian leftists, who insist upon banning it. And although it doesn't seem that way, prostitution legalization really is a left-right issue, and the left, as almost always, are on the reprehensible side of the story. Anyway, with that being said, don't forget to subscribe, follow me on Twitter at FreedomAlternat, and consider throwing some shekels in support of this channel. Thanks for watching, and see you around at Freedom Alternative.